Welcome to another edition of Vigorously, Vigorous Ones, and you're going to be listening, well, at least this is coming out anyway, on Christmas Eve. So, officially, happy holidays. I hope you enjoy them. I hope they are rejuvenating. I hope they are everything that you want them to be and not what the world tells you that they need to be. But I hope they are relaxing nonetheless. Thank you for joining me this episode. I decided to do a little bit of a reflective vibe this time because I think a lot of us get reflective this time of year. I mean, in the spirit of just the natural refresh and rejuvenation that the holidays bring, I just thought that I would share what I've learned about refreshing a brand and the ways to do it, the ways not to do it. I could tell that story by talking about the tale and telling the tale of Vigorously itself. So I thought we would do that today. I mean, really, this podcast has been nothing but enjoyable for me. It's a hobby, but it's something that I find myself just needing to do to stay mentally well. I launched it in March of 2024. And my intention is to continue this podcast into 2026. So today I will share with you what has worked and what has not worked in the hopes that you'll learn from me. Buckle up because it's a lot. But we can start this off on a positive note. Let's start with what's worked. Choosing a name and a brand, brand identifiers really, that have resonated with me or you as a host. I mean, whatever resonates personally, start there. That's going to be your North Star. Start, just by knowing yourself well enough to kind of answer some of those questions. And we'll get into that a little bit deeper as we go forward here. But let's back up a little bit and start with the name of the show itself, for example. I'll provide this as an example of that. The word vigorously is attached to the definition of my full first name, Valerie. In English, Valerie means vigorous and strong. I go by Val because I just feel like Valerie is not the vibe. Like, it's way too British and proper for me. For me, this like music obsessed, hot-headed, English, Irish, Italian American coming from the Rust Belt of America. Like, it's just, we do the most. We do the most. And Valerie is not somebody who does the most. She is having her tea with her ladies at lunch, and life is peaceful and good, and it's a nice spring day, and we're not just like at 1,000 at all times. There are many times where I can be at 1,000. So that's kind of why I just tend to go with Val. Val breaks the rules. Val doesn't care. Val's doing what she wants to do to the best of her ability. Val questions people rather than tries to fit in. I think Valerie more so fits in. So I don't know. That's just my perception of the name, but I digress. That is how I learned the word vigorously at all. The dictionary definition as an adverb of vigorously means to do something with effort, energy, and enthusiasm. In plain terms, doing something fully and not half-heartedly. We don't have time for the half-hearted stuff around here. If you know me as a person, you know that that's not how I live. Emotionally or metaphorically, it can also mean showing up boldly, living with intention, and engaging deeply rather than passively, which is probably why it hits with some impact and it does so well as a word to build a brand around, because everybody can understand what that means. And baby, if you're here, this is what we do. We do show up boldly. We do live with intention to the best of our ability. And we are way more interested in engaging deeply rather than passively. Vigorously just applies to me, Val, as a person, because I live my life that way. I'm not chaotic. I'm directed. And this is energy with intention. Y'all can see why it resonates for me as your host. And it helps probably if you, I would imagine, get to know me as a person. So what I'm getting at is when it's your turn and you're considering how to label your brand and what to call it and what the vibe is, try and use something that resonates with you personally as a starting point. Because vigorously is a word that is easy to understand and it's easy for anybody considering listening to determine whether or not this is a show that's right for them, I think that it made a great choice when it came to the branding. Because to me, when I'm calling the show Vigorously, and you can think about this when you choose your own wording, I think I'm also, the messaging becomes that I'm promising honest conversations. I'm promising emotional courage. Yes. I'm promising curiosity over certainty. I don't like to be too certain, but I like to question. And I'm promising a space where it's okay to care deeply, too. It's cool to care. I think we've got to a point where sometimes it's not because, well, if you really want me to get into it, I think a large part of that is just because we're exhausted. And that's why we don't care and don't have an interest in caring. But I also think we're not necessarily encouraging each other to care either. And that is kind of sad to me. I hope that what Vigorously does is tell listeners this isn't background noise, this is engagement, and that I don't have to show up perfectly. I just have to show up honestly with intention. I'm running laundry right now, and I got a hoodie on. I did not put makeup on. I'm doing this episode anyway because I'm doing my best to fulfill a commitment to you. And I think if you approach whatever your project is with the same spirit, you will find an audience that respects you. And you will earn that trust and you will earn that respect every single time you keep showing up. So, all things to consider when it's your turn. Choosing to name your show or your brand something that genuinely resonates with you as a person that is also easily digestible for followers makes all the sense. You and the brand become memorable that way. So try and find a vibe, a name, something that matters to you, and something that it's even better. It's like bonus points if it can also subtly spell out exactly what the mission of the brand is at the same time, kind of in the way that I just explained it. Vigorously, a lot of us know what that word means. There are implications to that. If you know the definition, live up to it. I also think that less is more when it comes to branding. Brand mottos, I wouldn't go over 6 words. That's just me. Like if saying a phrase or whatever, like if you're trying to attach something like that to your project, I wouldn't make it longer than like 6 words in a sentence. Especially for podcasting. We want something simple for the name of the show. And that's why I just chose to stick with one word that I felt described the vibe totally and completely and in the most concise way that I could have done it. One word accomplished that for me. So put some thought into that part of it. Yes, the full title is Vigorously with Val Kleinhands. That's also for legal reasons too, because this is attached to me. It is my name. Nobody can trademark my own name. What? So that's kind of why I decided to go that route as well. All things to think about. Less is more when it comes to wording. And I will dive into this a little bit deeper, but when it came time to actually work on the podcast from a branding perspective, as a brand, I noticed that looking back now, I can see that I was taking the word vigorously too literally. We'll get into that. But when we're talking about branding, a lot of what I mentioned also applies. Staying as authentic as possible is truly at the core of it. When you're developing the graphics, the aesthetics, the design, apply these types of thoughts to what you're doing. Like down to, I'm specific and I will put in the work. Okay. I'm about the feels and I am also structured. That must be the Capricorn and Cancer in me. But font use, something as simple as choice of font. Think about that. That is purely a vibe perception when it comes to selection. I'll give you an example. Since Vigorously is a reflection of me personally, Val, the person, I tend to love stuff from the 90s, early 2000s, today. I went with a 90s like sitcom / Vogue magazine type vibe, that type of font, that type of wheelhouse with the branding for not just my own personal website, but for Vigorously as well, because I think it made sense. And yes, it was something that was already kind of playing into what I was putting out there anyway. I was just paying attention to what was most comfortable for me and what was sustainable for me. We're going to get into this too. That is huge because sustainability equals consistency, and consistency is so important. So important. But to keep it consistent and to keep it truly a reflection of me, I had to do things that made sense for what the world already knew me as. So that's why we kind of went a 90s sitcom / like Vogue magazine type vibe for the font choice. Same thing with the color palette. On the subject of a color palette, I think sometimes simple and transferable and specific is a lot better. Black and white in my case. Easy color palette to apply to literally anything. A website, social media, aesthetic, graphics, this room itself, the content room itself. But I had the vision before we put this room together of what I wanted it to look like. And I was intentionally choosing white walls because they're amazing for photography, black trim because that's the boldness. That's me. That's me. My wedding dress was a gorgeous strapless white gown with a black sash. That was intentional. That was me. Like, you can do so much with that. So again, think about something that, when it comes to color palette, yes, it should stand out, but it should also be something that is easily transferable, particularly when you work with other brands. Something that would make a collaboration easy, something that wouldn't be so jarring if the two came together. Sometimes I wonder if that's why the Kardashians tend to choose neutrals, or at least Kim does for the majority of her stuff. I was considering that maybe that's why, because she does so many collaborations and it does all look cohesive because of a neutral color palette. It goes with anything. It works with anything. Take from that what you will, but that was just an example of why I feel the way I feel. Yes, choose something that works. Choose something that you think is also easily transferable, and choose something that is authentic to you. Brand voice. Let's talk about that for a moment. It's just literally what it is it's just imagining how your brand would speak if it were verbal, if it were talking to you directly. What is the vibe? What language are they using? Who is the brand speaking to? And are y'all speaking the same language? Now, this is likely going to be the part that you spend the most amount of time on, and it should be. It's what draws an audience in. Right down to the captions or how you script a video, or just things like that. Or if you're an artist and you're releasing music, well, think about how you're voicing the promo for that. Are you reaching who you want to reach? With every branding related choice you have to make, ask yourself, would the brand or anybody actually following it do this for real? Like, would that person be into this? I think that because I made Val Klein Hands and Vigorously such a reflection of who I am as a person, naturally, I kind of gained an audience that mirrors me. I do think a lot of you are other millennial girls like me. I think a lot of you are music fans like me. Who do you want to talk to? You might be able to answer those types of questions if you do mirror that brand after some aspect of you personally. Like I was saying, if you're listening to this podcast right now, you and I probably have something in common. And that is by design, because I made it that way. Vigorously is tied to Val the person. We might be close in age. We might also identify as female. We might have some shared life experiences. Maybe you moved a lot too. Maybe you've endured some struggles in the workplace and navigated all that frustration and healing and trauma and are trying to come to terms with all of it after the fact and process it so that you could just go forward as a better person, learning from all that. Maybe you and I are doing that together. Maybe you're also married and enjoying it. Furthermore, maybe you're married to someone you've known for decades, just like I am. Maybe you're also married without kids, and that comes with its own stereotypes and stigmas, and we gonna get through that together. Maybe you're just frustrated by the way that society conducts itself, and sometimes you sit back and you think, this doesn't need to be as difficult as it is. And you think direct, intentional communication is a huge part of the solution to that. Maybe you're with me on that, and that's why you're here. We talk a lot about that here. Maybe you're also just a music fan. Maybe you're an artist yourself, and you want tips, or you just want to nerd out about music. Maybe you're a girly who's into pop culture, fashion, all the above. Maybe you're also a content creator. We do talk about the innards of creating what we do. Maybe you're into the paranormal. Talk about that a little bit. Maybe you're into animals. All that. We probably have something in common, and that is by design. So all of this to say, I think your project, you're going to be a lot more intentional and specific and direct with it if you kind of draw something from yourself into it. Go as authentic as possible. Your workload working on this project and the consumption involved for a follower is going to be a lot more palatable and sustainable. Flexibility, I think, in communication is key too. Consider this. Now, I'm not talking about violating boundaries here. Let me be very clear. What I am saying is do your best to meet somebody where they're at. I think I've learned this over time too. Do that when it comes to communication and when it comes to scheduling. Do your very best to find some compromises there. Because the more effort you put into being approachable and available, well, that's going to return. That's going to return, and that's going to be worth it. Marketing a product or a project is a collaboration. So be collaborative. Usually, right? If it might be your idea, but there's a team behind it, maybe making it happen, unless you truly are working solo. If you're working solo, I definitely recommend basing this off of who you are as a person. But what I want to encourage you to do is be collaborative within the process, whether it's you heading everything and reaching out and making it happen and creating all the content for it, or whether you do have a team. I think there's benefits to using social media as a free focus group. Use social media as a free focus group. Put up polls in those stories, ask questions, and put calls to actions in those captions. Be engaging in the comments where you're comfortable. Let people know that you're actually there. Let people know that you're actually listening, because that's all they want. They want to be treated like a human. Meet with your partners, your followers, just whatever, where they're at. Are they in the DMs? And I mean this literally. Are they in the DMs? What social platform do they use? Do they email? Do they text? Do they call? What are their preferences? Try your best to build that relationship by meeting somebody where they're at to the best of your ability. Because I've allowed some flexibility within my schedules, I've had interviews scheduled that I didn't ever think I would get. But being a little bit flexible when it came to my scheduling allowed for that and helped with that and helped me to book some very memorable, fun interviews. So it's worth it. Let's talk about what hasn't worked for a moment. Inconsistency. It's a problem because when you're not giving your audience every opportunity that they need to get to know the brand and buy into the brand, you're here one day, you're not the next, or when you do show up, you're not the same, that kind of vibe. Well, that's not just confusing, but it doesn't give somebody the chance to really get to know you. They're not reminded of you, and you're not constantly or consistently growing either when that's happening. Because you're either bringing something that nobody understands to the table, or you're not being reliable. And if you're not reliable, well, how are they going to trust you? I also think that being too one-dimensional in branding is something that has not worked for me. Now, of course, this is going to depend on what specifically you're marketing, but specific inanimate items, yeah, they deserve specific treatment, but humans or animals, not so much. There's got to be a lot more nuance and thought into that. Music. I think there's got to be some thought, any type of art, because it can morph into anything. Don't be so one-dimensional in it. We talked earlier this week about how we're seeing genre blending in music, especially in 2025. We've seen that. And I do believe more and more of us are going to be comfortable with that humane aspect of music specifically, and that could bleed into other parts of our life. We're looking for a little bit more humanity again. Another example that I'll give you is this. Like, I was doing too many podcasts at once. 4 at once at the same time. This was right as COVID was becoming a thing. And for a couple years after, because I just didn't know any different, and I didn't give myself enough time to really think a lot of that through. I just wanted to get it done. All of these podcasts had their own brand, and it was they each were tied to one aspect or one interest of mine personally, specifically. One was about mental health, one was about music, one was about fashion and pop culture, and one was about the paranormal. Radio forced me to think that way because I've been out of the game for a minute, but at the time, and we're talking anywhere between 2011 and 2018, that was how the industry was run. That mentality was how the industry was run. They were putting their target audience and those demographics into very specific boxes and categories, and that gave me a false narrative that each audience was different and deserved to be treated as such. But I don't think we're seeing that anymore. We're definitely not seeing it in music, but we're, just in life. I think as a society, we're starting to embrace being multidimensional human beings. It's not going to be such a turnoff if you're not full on metalhead all the time, for example. Like it's, I think millennials are starting to change that. And I'm actually happy to see that. I mean, that schedule and that workload to run all 4 of those podcasts just became way too much for me to keep up with. And it became a lot for my audience to follow because it's like, wow, you got 4 things going on at once. And what? Like, I don't know what we're doing. It's a lot to keep up with. So that led to some inconsistency in both branding because I couldn't decide on like color palettes, vibes. I couldn't dedicate enough time to do something thoroughly to any of them. And I wasn't consistent in my posting because of that either. So nobody was getting the message anyway. They weren't getting the message. I wasn't giving it to them to the best of my ability. I learned from that. When you're forcing a workload that isn't sustainable, I have learned from this that yes, it leads to inconsistency, and there's no product, so to speak, put out on a regular basis. So what are people doing? What are they getting to know? They're not learning anything. I thought that vigorously meant I needed to go hard and go after everything. It meant pumping out way too many episodes at once for a while and just recruiting way too many guests at once. I wasn't doing my due diligence when it came to prepping for those interviews. So much so that I also wasn't even doing my due diligence like when I was doing solo episodes too. And life changes. I didn't want to accept, I think there was part of me that didn't want to accept that life changes were going to force those adjustments. I wanted nothing to get in the way, but the truth is sometimes they do. And that's okay too. Vigorously didn't mean that I had to go after things with vigor. And it shouldn't mean that for you or for your brand either. You set the pace. Make sure it's one that's comfortable enough where you're absolutely certain that you can provide consistency at. I think in conclusion, refreshing a brand isn't about doing more. It's about doing what you're already doing with clarity, honesty, and intention. What I have learned through Vigorously and just watching other brands that we celebrate as a society is that the strongest ones are they're not the loudest or the busiest, even though those make the most noise. They're the ones that feel true. True to the person or the people behind them. And they're true to a pace they can actually sustain. And true to the people that they are meant to connect with. Vigorously doesn't work because I try to be everything to everybody. I know that. Val the person is not everything to everybody. I know that. And it took so long to be okay with just that. Like, I feel like I still catch myself being ashamed of that sometimes. And I'm working on having that not impact me as deeply as it does. And being more comfortable with just saying, look, this is the situation. This is me. Do with that what you will. I'm really, really, really working on trying to be comfortable with that. You know, I finally stopped separating myself into pieces and just let the brand reflect the real full version of me. Interests, contradictions, evolution, and all. And when I slowed down and simplified and trusted that showing up consistently mattered more than showing up constantly, everything got a lot clearer. I haven't really changed a whole lot, at least at its core, of my setup since I was blessed with it in I mean, August to me is really when I started to crank out content from this beautiful new room. I set an intention and it went from there. Everything got clearer. So if you're thinking about refreshing your own brand or starting something new, ask yourself, does this feel like me? Can I sustain this without burning out? Does it invite new people in rather than overwhelm them? Because doing something vigorously doesn't mean pushing harder than you can handle. It means showing up fully on purpose in a way that you can stand behind again and again and again. That's why this works. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for showing up. If this episode resonated at all, I would love to hear that in the comments, in the DMs, reviews, whatever. Share this with somebody who is about to embark on this journey too. Maybe they're in the middle of it. Anybody rethinking their brand, their creative direction, all the above. I think there's some good general stuff here just for really anybody. And I hope that we're all succeeding in 2026. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye.